In March this year, I drove the petrol-powered version of Mazda's all-new MX-30. And even though there was a lot to be liked, at the time I said perhaps the forthcoming EV version would make the most sense. And that, for me, is the one that really makes the most sense. See? I did say that. But it's now late June, and this is the E35 Astina version of the MX-30, Mazda's all-electric version. And I'm going to take it for a drive. It's important to test a new car in the right environment, and if this had been any of Mazda's previous MX models, I'd probably be heading out of the city to one of my favourite driving roads. But this is Mazda's first production electric vehicle, and its natural habitat is Metropolis. I don't want to spend too much time going over the exterior or interior of the MX-30 because I've covered all that when I drove the hybrid version back in March, and you can watch that video here. What this car is all about is its drivetrain, Mazda's first pure electric vehicle. And it makes perfect sense to be driving it through Melbourne CBD, where there's lots of stop-start traffic and emissions are a big deal. And the MX-30's dimensions make driving in cities like this so much more feasible. Like doing a U-banger like that in Melbourne CBD is really easy. Great dimensions, good visibility, I can see what's going on. Under the floor of this car, I have a 35.5 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery, which is not huge, but it's enough for about 224 kilometers. Most people would find that is completely adequate, especially if you reside in the metropolis like this, or you're just doing a short commute day to day. 107 kilowatts from a 35.5 kilowatt-hour battery doesn't sound like a lot, but the most important figure is 270 newton meters of torque. And that makes a big difference. It's exactly what you want when you're doing lots of stop-start driving in a CBD environment like this. It actually feels a lot quicker than the petrol-powered version, which has got more power. Acceleration off the mark is actually pretty impressive. More than adequate for this kind of driving, and it's accompanied by a weird synthetic created sound. I'm not the first person to have said it, but it is very Jetsons. Of course, the biggest advantage with an EV is that you get lots of regenerative braking. That's where the motion of the car slowing down recharges the batteries. In the MX-30 35 Astina, you can actually change the level of regen braking through 5 settings, and you use the pedals on the steering wheel, not to change gear. Obviously this car doesn't have any gears, it's single speed. If I pull on the left one here, I've now got maximum regen effect. So if I accelerate and let my foot off the brake, there's actually quite a lot of braking done for me just by taking my foot off the throttle. And every time I do that, the battery's being topped up, I'm going to go a little bit further. That battery and all of its electric gubbins adds about 160 kilos to the weight of this model. That's actually not too much. Normally when you bung in a big EV battery, it adds on lots and lots of kilos. But a 35.5 kilowatt hour battery is not the biggest in its class. So this car weighs just 1.6 tons. Gotta love Melbourne traffic. Although somehow I'm actually enjoying it a little bit more being in an EV. There's something smug about sitting here knowing I'm not putting out any carbon emissions into the environment. And there's almost a strangely challenging thing about making this battery last as much as I can and go further, make the best use of that regen braking. It's almost like a computer game. Right, I'm going to flick over now into minimum regen mode, and it actually completely changes the way this car feels. I've now got an almost eerie sort of coasting effect, where it's almost not wanting to slow down at all. I feel like I've gone super efficient, like I'm just sliding on ice or something. And then there's the chassis of the MX-30 EV. This is the bit that surprised me the most. With that extra weight, I was expecting it to feel a lot heavier, but the effect is not at all that. Because the battery is low down in the car, the center of gravity is really low as well, and somehow the EV works a bit better than the petrol version. There's a sense of stability and sure-footedness that I really wasn't expecting. And last night I was actually lucky enough to sneak out and take it for a drive after dark, and finding some windier roads, it just gets better. I love the way this thing feels on the road, and although you're not going to go too far, maybe not a road trip kind of car with 244 kilometers in the battery, when you do find a windy road, it's actually tons of fun. Now this is the Astina, the flagship specification version, which means you get loads of equipment, lots of lovely materials. I've got an 8.8-inch screen up here, lots of safety features, 10 airbags, yes 10, and of course a 5-star ANCAP safety rating. But all of that gear comes at a price, and the EV version costs $65,500. That's not the most expensive EV on the market, but given that it's got a relatively small battery, it's certainly not the cheapest either. Interestingly though, Mazda had the option to bring in a slightly lower spec version that would have cost less cash underneath the Astina variant. But it chose not to because its strategy is about getting electric into the premium sphere first and then bringing in slightly more affordable, accessible versions. I think that's the right strategy. While the MX-30 35 Astina certainly isn't the cheapest EV, nor will it be the last from Mazda, and we can expect far more affordable and accessible versions in the future. My only key problem with the MX-30 Hybrid, the petrol-powered version, is that it has such a radical design on the outside, it kind of implies there's something equally radical going on underneath its skin. But essentially it's mechanically identical to the CX-30, but it's a lot more expensive. This car, it has the same exterior looks, but it does have a radical pure electric drivetrain underneath its skin. And that's why this car makes so much more sense to me. Add to that a chassis and a stability that feels a lot better to me than the petrol-powered one, and the EV is the one that makes the most sense. Now, what else can I find to be right about today? In March this year, I drove the petrol-powered version of Mazda's all-new MX-30. What's my line after that? What happened? It was so perfect and still and sunny before, and yeah, of course it's no twin-turbo 4-litre AMG. We won't use that bit probably.